Good day to everyone. Good day to my classmates and good day to our instructor in engineering economy, Engineer Aldrin A. Bacalso. So today we are going to report about the effects of factors on economy. So we know that there are various factors affecting our economy, especially nowadays. And it is very important that we get acquainted with these factors if we decided to venture economic works in the distant future. Why is the effects of factors on economy important? So we know that the economic climate has a big impact on businesses. So the level of consumer spending affects prices, investment decisions, and the number of workers that the business employ. So it is also important that we know what really is what are the factors of economy. Um, does it mean? So this means that the factors that help to determine the firm operates. So before we engage more into the topic, let us first define its objectives. So the members of the reporters are Shine May Albaño, Jhon Kenan Baran, Charisse de Manuel, Jane Montecalvo, yours truly Raf Marthy Puerto, and Kurt Vincent Songkit. So the objectives of these reports are: first, relations among cost and capacity; second, determining the capacity factors; third, having a glimpse of the load factor; fourth is the diversity factor; fifth is the demand factor; sixth is knowing about the power factor; and lastly, it is about getting acquainted with the analysis of future demand.
Relations among cost and capacity. In the selection of plant, equipment, and machinery, an engineer is always confronted with problems involving size and use of the plant or equipment to be adopted. An engineer must always be cognizant of the effects of these parameters on the first cost, the fixed costs, and the variable costs. The most significant relation between capacity and first cost is that as capacity increases, so does the first cost, though usually to a diminishing degree. For instance, the first cost of a motor with two times the capacity of another is typically not twice as high as the first cost of the smaller motor. Another example, the cost of a building do not rise in proportion to the number of stories added. The basic relation between cost and capacity is that fixed cost per unit varies inversely as the capacity. As capacity increases, the fixed cost per unit of capacity decreases. Relative to capacity, variable costs vary directly as the capacity, though not proportionately. It is often the case that variable costs increase with an increase in capacity at a diminishing rate. An increase in production capacity enables the purchase of materials in bigger quantities at usually reduced wholesale costs. Since the fixed cost per unit of output decreases as output increases, and since variable costs increase as output increases, there will be a certain quantity of output whereby the total minimum cost results. Thus, in an economy study involving size, consideration must be given to capacity.
Load factor. Load factor is the ratio between the average demand and the maximum demand. Therefore, its equation is load factor is equal to average demand divided by the maximum demand. Maximum demand is defined to be the maximum load that occurs in a certain interval of time within a given period. Like capacity factor, load factor has a maximum value of 100%. For best economic efficiency, the load factor like capacity factor should approach this maximum as closely as possible. So in order for the factor to be economic, if I ma-identify economic efficiency sa load factor, kailangan ma-reach niya ang maximum value 100%. Then for example, for electric power companies, however, the use of a low load factor may become a necessity in order to meet the demands of customers at all times. Most of the time, the power demand is low, and this may be considered as the average demand. However, at a certain times of the day, some customers may require additional power which the power plant must supply. This will correspond to the maximum demand. If this maximum demand is too great and is required for a long time, the plant may not be able to supply the needed power. In this case, therefore, a low load factor would be desirable from the customer's viewpoint. Thus, the question arises, is this variable from the standpoint of the power plant? The answer is clear, because as the load factor decreases from 100% to a lesser value, a bigger plant would become necessary. This will mean larger first cost and bigger fixed cost per unit of output.
Capacity or plant factor. Capacity or plant factor is defined to be the ratio between the average load and the total available capacity. Thus, the equation for this factor is capacity or plant factor equals average load over or divided by total available capacity. The capacity factor of an asset is a measure of the extent to which such an asset is utilized. Hence, it is sometimes called as utility factor. The closer a capacity factor is to 100%, the greater the utilization of equipment and the lesser the fixed cost per unit of output. For example, if on average 7 out of 10 machines are used in a manufacturing plant, then ang capacity or plant factor atong machine is 70% since the average load is 7 tapos ang total available capacity is 10 man, so we'll get 0.7 and then we will be converting that to percentage, hence we'll get 70%. Now let's move on to diversity factor. Diversity factor is the ratio between the sum of the maximum demands of the separate parts of the system and the maximum demand of the entire system. This is the equation for diversity factor. So we have diversity factor is equal to the sum of maximum demands of separate parts of the system divided by the maximum demand of the entire system. Diversity factor of an asset may be equal to unity or greater. Ang ginapasabot aning unity is 1. So, diversity factor will always be 1 or greater. So, a diversity factor of 3 for a power plant would mean that the power plant should have only 1/3 as much capacity as the sum of the demands of the individual customers. A diversity factor of unity would mean that the maximum demands of the individual customers occur at the same time. Diversity factor most frequently affects the electrical industry. So we know man nga electricity is used by mostly tanan, but magvary ang gina-consume nato nga kuryente o ang time wherein gina-consume nato to siya. For example, ako mag-consume ko kuryente from 9 to 10 and then gamay lang ako ma-consume. Then for some people, they will consume or mag-peak ang ilang consumption sa kuryente at around 12 ana. So naay diversity ato kay maglahi-lahi man ang atong consumption. And then apart from electricity or electrical industry, nag-affect pod ang diversity factors, for example sa mga utilities. So we have water utilities and gas utilities. So the difference lang sa duha kaning sa water, ang advantage lang nila from electricity kay makastore sila if ever man good kay sometimes dili man dinaghan ang ginamitan sa water o gas, di ba? There are just major peak hours and then makastore sila para magamit to nila tong ma-store nila, magamit nila nga kanang maximum ang demand sa people. For example, kanang sa water, pag dili peak, for example kanang ting-ulan dili man jud daghan na magamit sa tao, and then ma-store lang to nilang tubig, and then for example kanang nay mga events like kanang pista ana, kay dako jud ang consumption sa mga tao ana. So murag ma-divide ang kanang ma-store sa katong for example tank ana, water tank or tank sa gas ana. Tapos, apart ana, kay we also, kaning diversity factor will also affect other commodities. For example, kanang commodities nga, nalay certain time sa year nga ginagamit siya. For example, kanang hamon o queso de bola. We don't usually use those. Dili na to na siya gina-purchase kaayo. Pag kanang, for example, kanang July, ana, dili man kita nag-purchase ana. Usually, jud kay dira na siya December, bare months na siya manggawas. So dira nimo maka-affect na siya sa output sa imuhang machine or sa inyong company, sa inyo ma-generate nga nga supply og sa inyo ma-generate pod nga income.
As a continuation, I am Jane Montecalvo, and my task is to report what is demand factor. Demand factor is defined to be the ratio between the maximum power demand and the sum of the connected loads of the system. This can be expressed as demand factor equals maximum power demand over maximum demand of entire system. This factor is a measure of the requirements that the system has to supply if all the connected loads were used all at the same time. For example, naisa ka motor which is the prime mover of several machines nga naay horsepower rating equal sa sum of the horsepower of different machines connected to it. Ang sum sa horsepower of the individual machine is mao na siya ang total connected load. So in demand factor na siya term na low demand factor. Ang low demand factor mo-occur siya if ang individual machines are performing work which requires less power than the maximum. Thus, there is too much motor for the actual demand. Ang cost be could be reduced pinaagi sa smaller rating motor, which will mean lower first cost and less operating cost. Another example is next. Another example is if naa kay maximum power demand na 145 kilowatts tapos 184 kilowatts for total connected loads, which is mao na siya ang mga maximum demand of entire systems. So i-divide lang siya, makakuha kag 0.79 na demand factor. Moreover, demand factor may have a value less than or equal to unity. So sama sa giingon ni Charisse ganina, ang unity means equal to the number of 1. It is desirable to have a demand factor as close to unity as possible, for it will mean that the actual requirements are about equal to what is supplied. So means mas convenient kung ang demand factor kay close siya sa 1 as possible para ang actual requirements kay ma-equal siya kung unsa ang gisupply.
Greetings everyone, my name is Vincent D. Songkit and I will be the one to report about power factor. Power factor is a unitless number using alternating current circuits. It can be used to refer to a single piece of equipment such as an induction motor or through electricity consumption of an entire building. In either case, it represents the ratio between true power and apparent power. So ang formula being ang ginagamit sa power factor is equals to kW over or divided by kVA. So unsay pasabot ani? So i-relate na to ang power factor gamit ang pagpalit nato sa beer. Kung mopalit ta og isa ka baso nga beer, ang sulod sa baso kay beer ug ang form. Mo ni ang beer, mo ni ang foam. So kung dagan ang beer, the less foam there will be. Therefore, sulit ang atong beer. If kung mas daghan ang foam, gamay ang beer, therefore dili sulit ang beer. The beer represent our true power or ang kilowatts or ang kW. Mao ni ang atong kailangan ug atong gusto. The foam represent our reactive power or ang kVAR or kilovolt amps reactives. Mao ni ang useless nga butang. There will be always na be some na kailangan pa nato siya bayaran pero di day gyapon nato magamit. Pero actually naagyapon siya gamit and purpose. The combination of wait lang, balik day. The combination of kW or kilowatts and kVR or kilovolts amp reactive is ang apparent power or ang kVA or ang kilovolt amps. Therefore, the power factor is a ratio sa useful power or true power in kilowatts or kW divided sa what we charge for which is ang kVA or ang kilovolt amps. So it telling us how much value for money we were getting for the power we consume. An increase in the power factor will mean a reduction in the necessary generating equipment of the power plant. Increase in power factor may be accomplished by the installation of equipment such as static condensers, synchronous condensers, capacitors, synchronous, and unity power factor motors.
Now for the last topic of this report, I am Raf Marthy Puerto, tasked to report the analysis of future demand. So the analysis of future demand, also known as the forecasting or the demand forecasting. So an ever-present problem for utility and non-utility companies. When we say utility, it is the companies that gives public service. For example, electricity, gas, or water. So those companies giving public service regarding those mga energy or mga supply are utility companies. And when we say non-utility companies, these companies are those na nag-generate. So from the word itself, non-utility, so it is not for public purpose. However, they are selling their products man sad or supply to other companies or ma-distribute siya sa mga utility companies. So assuming that current needs have been is the forecasting of future demand for their products or the provided for. Should an enterprise invest more now in order that the demands within the foreseeable future can be met adequately when the time comes? So this problem is one of the most difficult but nevertheless pressing problems of industry as a whole. So gonna give you a visualizing example. So katong last pagtungtong sa Burmans, so we have seen a very vast shortage in terms of our beverages. So in that time, you can conclude that you have to have stocks on the beverages prior to the uh, Burmans so that you can address the demands of the people in those particular time. So manufacturing and utility companies have to prepare for possible expansions due to an increase in the demand for their products or services. The parameters which will always enter into future demand analysis are first, the trend in population increase, and second, the kind and amount of service which such popul which such population increase will need. Thus, in the future demand analysis growth be taken into account, but also the possibility that the power requirements per capita will also materially increase due to the need for more power for more industries, more electrical fixtures and appliances in home, and other possible future demands. So, we know that the analysis of future demand is tantamount to saying that we are forecasting the demand or the demand forecasting. So by definition, it is the systematic process to evaluate future demand for a specific product. So it is only applicable to a specific product that you are going to analyze so that you can determine the future demand of that specific product. So it allows you to examine the sale scientifically over upcoming weeks, months, and years so that you know exactly how much stock to order and hold at any given time period. So there are a lot of times in the year that the demand of a specific product is low or the demand is high. So if you are a good analyzer of those products, you can determine when are those product is on high demand and when are those product is on low demand. So with the help of demand forecasting, business can enhance inventory by predicting future sales from analyzing past sales data to make proper business decisions about everything from inventory, planning, and warehouse needs to running flash sales and meeting customers' demand. So analysis of future demand does not only end in the future, I mean in the present time. So you are take into account the past datas and we analyze it so that we can reflect those data in the future demand. So we can define demand forecasting as the method of using historical sales data to evaluate future customer demand. So no, there is no definite pattern of analysis is available for industry in general, but any pattern followed must depend upon the following. So first, the use of past records to forecast possible future requirements. So akong gingon ganina na we should take into account the past records so that we can reflect those data in the future analysis of the demand or the demand forecasting. So it is usual and human endeavor to proceed from what is known to the unknown. However, the future requirements usually behave in a manner not quite like the one expected. So, in spite of the limitations of past records, they still provide the best basis for any future forecast. So, we should not invalidate the past records because it is a very substantial data that we can use in the analysis of future demand. So, the second one is the consideration of all factors affecting future demand. A power company must consider not only the population increase, but also other factors such as the establishment of more industries within its territory, the possible increase in power consuming devices, and the trends in migration of people. So it says that we should not limit our factors to only the number of people present in a certain area because there are quite a lot of factors that may arise in a certain place that may potentially affect the future demand of a certain product. So it said here the factors such as the establishment of industries. So it is necessary that industries are present in a certain community because this will encourage more people to venture or to go to that particular place. And also it was stated here that the possible increase in power consuming devices. So because of a very technologically advanced world that we have now, we are deemed to buy or to purchase different power devices that we use in our home. Like for example, our the a more convenient and energy efficient refrigerator or microwave or a more advanced televisions or laptop computer. So there are a lot of factors affecting it, and also the trends of migration of people. So we cannot deny the fact that people migrate and go to one place to another. So finding a favorable place for them to live, so that is the second one factor. The next one is the periodic review of the accuracy of the forecast and making the necessary adjustment for the discrepancies between the forecast and the actual demands. So this is only applicable if you have already garnered all of your data so that you can analyze this data and have an interpretation of this data. So I have prepared in the next slide about what are the steps that we are going to do or we are going to familiarize with when we are about focusing on the demand factor demand analysis or the demand forecasting. So the first step in future demand analysis that I have identified is the identification of business objectives. So initially, we should know the aim of forecasting. So what are we forecasting for? What are we aiming for in the future? So we know that it is demand. So how are we going to forecast the demand using the present data that we have, and of course taking account the past data that we have accumulated or we have researched. So demand forecasting or the analysis of future demand should have a clear purpose. So the evaluation of factors like composition and quantity of demand for goods, cost to be quoted, sales planning, and inventory control, etc., should be done in the identification stage. So first, you have to identify your business objectives so that the flow of the process for the analysis of your future demands will be easy. The next step is determining the nature of goods. So we know that there are different goods that have their own special demands, and it is also based upon their time of the year where those goods are very on high demand or on low demand. So for example, capital goods. When we say capital goods, it is the money or the cash that we have. The next one is the consumer durables. So when we say consumer durables, it is the machines or the appliances that we have in our home. The next one are the non-durable goods, like for example, foods or any other commodities that we require in our daily living. We should estimate which category our goods fall. So the next one is the determining the time period. So it is very important that we determine the time period. So based on the target set, the demand forecast can either for the short term or say for the next 2 to 3 years or a long term. So there is a time period for every specific product that we foresee or that we analyze for its future demand. So while forecasting demand for a short term, so we can assume many determinants on forecasting it to remain unchanged or do not change significantly. But in the long term, the elements of demands may transform. Thus, it is necessary to define the time or the time period. So that is very important. The next one is making a choice of method of forecasting. So there are quite several methods of forecasting that we are going to tackle. So after setting of aim and the time perspective, the method for implementing the future demand or the forecast of the demand is selected. So these are various methods of demand forecasting categorized under survey or qualitative methods and statistical or quantitative methods. Since gingon na to ganina na ang demand forecasting or the analysis of future demand is a scientifically proven method. So we can use the different quantitative and qualitative method na atong ma-incorporate sa atong data before we can analyze and interpret the result of our analysis. So the forecaster must choose the method the best suit suits its requirements. So the next one is the collection and adjustment of data. So after deciding the methods, the next step is to collect the needed data, which may be primary or secondary or both. So the primary data are the first-hand data that no one has collected before, while the secondary data are the data that are already available. So I think it's very self-explanatory. So after that we have collected and adjusted our data, we can now proceed to the last step, which is the estimation and interpretation of result. So after collecting the required data, we finalize the demand forecasting method. We evaluate the demand for the predefined period, and generally the estimate appear as equations and the result is interpreted and represented in an easy and accessible form. So at last, you require to comparing what you predicted to actual sales, which can help you adapt your future or next forecast. So after you have garnered the result of your analysis, you're going to compare that data from the past forecast, or should I say from the present forecast, kay, since future man ato ang gina-compute, ato ang ginapangitaan eh. So it is substantial na ang past forecast o ang ato ang present forecast is can be compared to the data nga atong nakuha. So now we will proceed to the problem solving about these economic factors.